Welcome to Licensed Poetics, a podcast where aspiring writers talk about books. I'm your host, Derek Dow.
And I'm your host, Fang Ling.
And together we form Voltron.
What's Voltron?
You know, like Power Rangers?
If we were Power Rangers or if we were some kind of duo that come together, what do you think we form?
Like, maybe Milan Kundera. Just criticizing books and saying which books we like and which ones matter and which ones don't.
That is so perfect. Anyway, I think this is a good segue to introduce the book of today's episode because obviously it's a book club episode, which is really exciting. And in this episode, we're talking about The Art of the Novel by Czech writer Milan Kundera. Listeners, or chat, as we call you, let us know in the comments if you can hear the difference in the audio quality, because we've changed our recording setup a little bit, and we're just curious to know if you can tell the difference. Hopefully it's better than before.
But if it's worse, also let us know so we can fix it.
Yes, please. So in today's episode, you will hear why we picked this book for book club. Did we finish the book? You'll also hear a synopsis, an author bio, and some segments that we have trialed and proven true for our book club episodes, like the XYZ question, which debuted in our last episode. And I think this book club is going to be very different from our previous episode because
we read the book.
Yes, that is a major difference because for our last episode, neither Derek and myself finished the book. Actually, we were very far from finishing. Yeah?
My dad listened to the last episode like this morning, and he was like, Jeremy bravely defended himself against you two. He bravely defended his favorite book against you two. Why didn't you guys read the book? He was like, you guys shouldn't be commenting on it if you haven't finished the book. I was like, Dad, if the book isn't good and I don't want to finish reading the book, that's the book's problem as well.
That's so good. But to be honest, Derek's dad, I have no defense. Thank you so much for listening, but really, I have no defense.
Yeah, that's fair.
The only thing I can promise is I'll do better. But honestly, even with that, I can't promise because I just can't.
We were quite critical for people who'd only read this much of the
Oh my god, we were so critical. That episode was an hour and 45 minutes.
I just want to say though, apparently it's made our friends want to read it. So obviously us not liking it means that it might be good for some people. I actually think that's probably true.
And it might be good for the book's marketing, it turns out. So not even the author should complain.
So Ken Liu,
you're welcome.
Fang Ling really wants to be your friend.
I really want to be your friend.
Please reach out.
But yes, going back to the book club pick for today, it's very different because it's not even a novel. It's not fiction. I think this is the first time on LP that we're reviewing a non-fiction book.
Mm.
And by the way, in today's episode, you'll also hear us reacting to some unhinged Goodreads reviews. But that'll be at the end of the episode, I think, after we tell you about our thoughts. And the only other thing is we normally do a spoiler-free section and a spoiler section. But since this book is nonfiction, it doesn't really apply here.
Which is good. I mean, that's we always struggle with that so much.
Yeah, it is really hard.
It's definitely the hardest part of
I think so too, honestly.
Yeah.
Because you have to think about designing the question in a way that is least invites you to say spoilery things. Yeah. Well, I guess we're spared from that in this episode. Yeah, this is a book club for aspiring writers. So that is our very specific angle.
And now we're talking about how to do a book club, which is quite meta, which is kind of on trend regarding the book today. So that's good.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This book is the meta lord of meta. Let's just jump straight into the first question, which is, why did we pick this book?
You picked it. I don't know what you were waiting for.
Yes, I picked it. So let me explain why I picked it. I think some members of the chat will know that I have always been a pretty big fan of Milan Kundera, the writer. But I've actually only read 2 of his novels prior to this. I've read The Book of Laughter and Forgetting and his famous work, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. The latter one I read when I was way too young. I don't think I appreciated it fully, but I really, really love The Book of Laughter and Forgetting. And, as you know, I'm an aspiring novelist. I've been trying to write a novel and failing to write a novel. And when I saw that Kundera has this book called The Art of the Novel, and I was like, and it's really short, so I was like, I really would like to hear his insights. And so that's why I suggested this book to Derek. Now, why did you agree to it so promptly?
I just thought I thought it's interesting, and like you were saying, like as a continuous writer's block sufferer, it's just anything, right? Like just to try to, and also because you'd already talked about Milan Kundera a lot. I was like, well, we got to trash Jeremy's favorite book last episode, and I thought, well, now we can go after Hong Ling's favorite author.
It's my turn. I wouldn't say he's my favorite author.
It's pretty high up there, though, right?
For me.
Yeah. You've talked about him a lot.
Yes, he is pretty high up there for me.
To be frank, I anticipate you'll be talking about him a lot less after this. But that's just my personal opinion. We can proceed.
Okay. So that is why we picked this book. And the next question is, did you finish?
Yeah. It was short. I mean, to be real, length was a pretty big problem last time.
Yeah, and hey, that's a huge part of the reason why I picked it. I just wanted something short.
Yeah. Because I think you'd come up with 2 options, right? It was The Joke.
Yeah.
Or The Art of the Novel. And,
yeah. The Joke is Milan Kundera's first debut novel. Yeah. So this book, The Art of the Novel, is only 165 pages.
Yeah. And debut works are usually pretty interesting. But I also wanted, the other thing as well is I wanted to compare it to, because I'd also read like Murakami's book about writing. And I thought that was interesting as well. So it's always interesting to read. I think a lot of big writers have their version of this book.
Yeah.
And also no one else would be interested in reading it except for people who want to write or
exactly. People who are interested in the craft.
Yeah.
And I actually have a confession. I actually technically didn't finish the book. But I have a perfectly legitimate excuse. Let me explain myself to the chat. So I read most of the book except for maybe about 10 pages at the end of chapter 6. And that is because I wasn't able to wake up early enough this morning to read it because there was an emergency in my building last night at 2 a.m. And they got us all to evacuate. And we all had to stand outside and wait around. There was a fire in the building. So it was a legit reason to evacuate, obviously, for safety. So I'm not complaining about that, obviously, but it did mean that I suffered from a severe lack of sleep last night. And so I wasn't able to finish the last 10 pages before the recording session, but I will finish them immediately after recording. Eric is shaking his head as part 6. Yeah, I have a feeling that part 6 might actually end up being my least favorite.
I mean, I don't think that's controversial, but I guess what's the next bit that we normally get into?
The next bit is 5 words or less, which should be a simple phrase of how you feel and no explanation should be needed.
Okay. Maybe you start.
No, I think you should start.
You know that I improv all of these, right?
That's
I don't
fine.
write any of these down. I don't know.
That's fine.
Okay, so simple, 5 words or less.
Yeah.
He's really annoying.
Oh no! Oh no!
I could go. He's really, really, really annoying. Yeah. All right. That's 5.
Okay. I guess.
What's yours?
Yeah. So it's gonna be an episode where Derek complains and I fangirls. But that doesn't mean I'm not critical though. So I think my 5 words would be. Now I just sound stupid after your 5 words.
I told you to go first. This was all on you, buddy.
I think my 5 words is I'm taking 2 out of those 5 from the compliments on the back of the book, the back cover of the book. Mm-hmm. Lucid and severe. Lucid, severe, I love it. Those are my 5 words.
Okay, right. And I mean that's pretty straightforward. But the thing is that, to be fair, I can also see I can understand where you're coming from as well. So I get what you're saying. But I actually think I think those things aren't in like conflict. I mean, maybe the I love it bit, but like the rest of it is kind of like the actual comments themselves.
Yeah, you mean you agree with lucid and severe?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, 100%.
To be honest, I think I see why it's annoying too. And it did annoy
Lucid
me
but
sometimes.
wrong. Often incorrect. Yeah, there's a lot of we can get into it, but
That's crazy.
I think he's wrong a lot. You should have stopped talking.
You think like he oversteps sometimes?
He oversteps a lot.
Oh my god. Okay. Next, I think we should give the synopsis of the book. The Art of the Novel is a collection of essays and reflections on the history, philosophy, and craft of the novel. Kundera explores the evolution of the novel as a literary form, tracing its roots from Cervantes to contemporary writers. He delves into the nature of characters, the role of history, and the meaning of action in fiction. Kundera also shares his personal experiences as a novelist, offering insights into his creative process and his views on the art of writing. Okay, one big thing that the synopsis missed, I think, is that the book has 7 parts. And he goes into a whole spiel about how the number 7 is so important to his writing and his thinking. And as a reader of his other books, I can tell you, yeah, some of his other books are also presented in 7 parts.
So I guess I'll go into the author bio.
Yeah.
Milan Kundera was a Czech-French.
Czech. What? Czech-French.
Right. I'll try it again. Milan Kundera was a Czech-French novelist known for blending erotic comedy with political criticism and philosophical reflection. His works often explored the human condition under political oppression and existential question. Famous for The Unbearable Lightness of Being, The Joke, and The Book of Laughter and Forgetting, Kundera tackled themes of exile, identity, and meaning in an absurd world. He lived in exile in France and was highly influential figure in literature.
There you go.
I think those are the 2 books you said you mentioned you read, right? So the ones that he's famous for, Book of Laughter and Forgetting and The Unbearable Lightness of Being.
Yep.
The Joke was the one that the other one that we might have read.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
I'm going to ask you something really crazy.
Sure.
You know...
I don't think it will be. This is a book podcast. Nothing that's said here is really crazy. No, I just mean it's about books. It's not going to be crazy.
No, this one's about me.
Oh, okay. Maybe it will be crazy.
No, you know my emigre piece?
Mm-hmm. Inspired by...
Yeah, so for the chat, a few years ago, I won a small local prize in writing. Thank you. Yes, Derek was there for the reading event. Thank you very much. And my piece was titled 8 Metaphors of the Emigre Writer. And the prompt of that writing competition was you have to pick a book from the Inner West Library to say that, create a piece of writing inspired by something. And my piece was inspired by The Book of Laughter and Forgetting by Milan Kundera. And at the time, I remember, my piece mentions Kundera explicitly in the last one of the 8 metaphors. So my piece is just 8 paragraphs, 8 metaphors. And now, looking back, I can, retrospectively realize how much influence he had on me at the time. I think the whole, 8 pieces, stringing together 8 pieces of, self-contained, independent parts, that idea totally transmitted to me, only that I wrote 8 instead of 7.
You've disappointed him.
Did you see any connection between his style and my writing though, specifically that piece?
It's hard to... I mean, I can't tell from this book, do you know what I mean? Because this is a non-fiction book. I can see the parallels in your personality. Does that help?
That's such a you thing to say. That's such a Derek thing to say.
All my attacks are ad hominem. I have no interest in discussing them. All jokes aside, I can see the. What did you? How did you describe it before? Lucid and severe. I think I would describe you in your writing and personally. That's how I'd describe you as well, I think, to be honest.
Wow. So like he has not only given me like his ideas, but he's also given me his personality. Like, he's like an STI.
You- He's like an STI.
Like it's transmittable.
Yeah, Milan could. Oh my god, do you have MK? Oh no, how'd you get it?
By reading his book. Oh man.
Does that mean you
Okay.
have MK for life, or does it go away if you treat? Can you treat MK?
Please tell me. Please tell me. I don't think I want it for the rest of my life.
Oh man.
Please tell me it's treatable.
All right.
Okay, the next question is the big one, the XYZ question. Fill in the blank. This book is very XYZ. And the top 3 most XYZ things about the book are... Okay, I guess there's no blank. It's replaced XYZ with a word or a concept of your choice.
If you got one, maybe you go first.
I think I'm just going to say this book is very quotable.
I think that's a good one. Yeah. I think, yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm not going to take yours, but I agree 100%.
Yeah, I think this book is so quotable. And so many of the things that he says, like about, the history of the novel, the purpose of the novel, and like what makes a novel distinct as an art form compared to, say, essay or even music. So many of the things, he's just so quotable. Like, and it's amazing that his quotability transcends language because a lot of his work is translated. I believe he writes the books in either Czech. Sorry, oh my god, is it Czechish or?
I don't think Czechish is correct. I don't know a lot of things. Oh, whoops. I don't know a lot of things, but I am fairly certain that Czechish is not a word.
I just made it up.
For all our Czech listeners.
Okay, the Czech language, formerly known as Bohemian, is a Slavic language. And Kundera mentioned that he prefers the word Bohemia over Czechoslovakia as well. So maybe I'll just say, Czech or Bohemian. He would have written a lot of his books in that language or in French. I believe he's like really competent, fluent in French as well.
I think he can. He knows 4 different languages.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And he did say that in his book too. Yeah, so maybe it's his command of so many languages that makes like his quotability transcend so many languages. And it's, I guess it's just in an extremely succinct way that he delivers his ideas. So I have actually selected 4 quotes. All of them are really short and I would love to share with chat. And I would love to see your reaction to these quotes, by the way, Derek. One thing in the book that he always does is that he views his art, the art of the novel, as supreme. Like he holds it above like all else. And he has this point where he's like, he thinks the novel like approximates human existence, right? And so it predates a lot of the modern sciences. So this quote says, the novel dealt with the unconscious before Freud, the class struggle before Marx. It practiced phenomenology, which is the investigation of the essence of human situations, before phenomenologists. Yeah, I really like this quote, and I think I agree with it. What do you think?
I agree, 100%. But I don't care. And that's kind of the thing that, if you've done your is that your XY, or do you have a...
Quotable, yeah.
Yeah, quotable.
I think you should share what your XYZ word is, and then you can give your examples after mine.
But it's like, I don't know how... The problem is that it's not one word.
That's
Because
fine.
if it was one word, I would go obvious. But if it was more than that, it would be like obvious statements made with like conviction. That's really what a lot of it is. And that's where I'm not like impressed. But his observations are like, did you? So the example that you use is like very quotable, right? Which is great because it's a very great quote, and it will impress a lot of people. But if you think about it for a second, if the novel is about human existence, and the human existence and the conditions for it create political movements, then of course novels will talk about these things before they become formal movements. That's like the nature of so that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, I just don't find a lot of the observations like wow,
that
like,
original.
Yeah, I didn't have any revelations reading the book. Is kind of the feeling I got.
That's very fair. Okay, first thing, I think you're very smart, Derek. And I think it's good. I think to give like context, the quote that I just read from comes from a chapter called Dialogue on the Art of the Novel, and it's literally a dialogue. I think it was an interview maybe between Milan Kundera and another writer. And I think the other writer was being kind of like, oh, your novel is phenomenal, I can't even say phenomenological. And then Kundera was like, no, it's not. My novel is like, novels in general deals with it like before phenomenology is even a thing. So maybe in response to your criticism, he's kind of dealing with like other people's like over mystical and over a certain way of interpreting his novel, and he's like kind of defending himself or even clarifying his intentions to the people who would have raised the other questions.
Yeah, and I am also aware that it's a compilation of a bunch of different things that make up one thing. Did he create this book, or is this a compilation that someone else has put together?
Good question. I think he did create this book. So in my edition, there's this little author's note in the beginning. It says, "The world of theories is not my world. The following pages are simply the reflections of a practitioner." And the several pieces comprising this book are written between 1979 and 1985. And despite their separate births, I conceived them all with the idea of eventually bringing them together. So I think, to answer your question, yes, he did create this book. But yeah, so back to my XYZ question. See, this is why we have the XYZ question, to ground our discussion. Yeah. That was my first quotable quote. The second one is, like, I underline all of them and write like little stars next to them. Because sometimes I'm just like it's so satisfying to have someone articulate something so well, you know?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Okay, this one where he's analyzing... Oh yeah, this entire book is just him analyzing the great novelists of Europe. And I have not read a lot of those classic novels, so I do find sometimes those passages a bit boring. But his insights I can like understand even though I haven't read the novel. Like this one where he's basically saying that when there is like supreme power in the world, it creates two poles of reaction. In this realm, one pole is the identification with power, to the point where the victim develops solidarity with his own executioner. And the other pole is the non-acceptance of power through the refusal to take seriously anything at all, which is to say, we have lived... Yeah. So he's saying that we have lived between those two poles, and those two poles are represented by two characters from the literary oeuvre that he's referencing. And I love that.
Oeuvre.
Yeah, oeuvre, canon, whatever. Wait, did I use the word correctly? I don't think I did.
I think so. Like, oeuvre is like the pantheon?
I think oeuvre is for one specific creator, though. Yeah, sorry, I was wrong. The body of work of a painter, composer, or author.
Yeah. A single.
So that was wrong. So I should have said literary canon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my god, I love this so much. It's just, yeah, that is exactly what China is like. And that's an important point to say, because when I read Kundera, I'm reflecting on Chinese society mostly. And you obviously wouldn't do the same. That is so true, is when the victim develops solidarity with his own executioner. Like, when such power exists in the world, people are so readily empathetic to that power. Like they will put that power before themselves, and then they will do things, and they will like consider what it will do to the power. In China, like even in my friend circle, if I bring up something critical of China's power, like if I criticize like a rule or an institution, a system or something, they'll be like, yeah, but that's what the rule makers want. That's what's good for the rule makers. And they don't say it in like a despairing way, like, oh, that's never going to change. That's what the rule makers want. They say it in like a self-assertive way, that they're like, that's what the rule makers want, as if they're the rule makers themselves, and then they're just happy about it.
Yeah, he makes a lot of interesting observations. I personally didn't connect with the political stuff as much, but I can appreciate it.
Very understandable, yeah. Okay, so that was the second very quotable quote. Oh my god, this one. I wonder what you think of this one. Is where I guess he's kind of comparing novels with essays. He basically asserts that there's something like magical about the like imaginative nature of the novel, how like the fictional nature, right? It says like, he talks about when you insert reflections, like the author's reflections into a novel. He says, the moment it becomes part of a novel, reflection changes its essence. Outside the novel, we're in the realm of affirmation. Everyone is sure of his statements, the politician, the philosopher, the concierge. Within the universe of the novel, however, no one affirms. It is the realm of play and hypothesis. In the novel, then, reflection is essentially inquiring, hypothetical.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that.
Right.
Very obvious statement. I don't know, like it's just not. It's that actually makes the book itself way more interesting. Like if you view this book through that lens, it becomes really interesting.
Wow, you're so meta. How does your brain just goes in your brain goes in circles, Derek? Like
I believe it's called spiraling, and I think it's due to poor mental health. I'm not sure. It's not some ability.
It's when you can't like immerse. You just, the only way to engage with things is to detach from them.
Well, it's not detaching, right? Because it puts you. It's like, I think meta is if done correctly, is the best way to immerse yourself even deeper. Because once you accept that this level of reality separated from you is not real, then you realize that your level of reality is also not real. And it's just like a funnel that goes on forever. And so I'm more immersed than anybody. Yeah. I think I'm arguably too immersed.
Man. This is great. I love it. Loving this discussion. I love this quote because it brings up the interesting reason of like why we always struggle to be like, I don't like this character, but then that's the point. I don't like this author. Like, is the author a pedophile or is the character a pedophile? That's why it's a never-ending debate, right? Because we're in the murky waters of fiction.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it's...
Can I just say, I'm so glad I have you as a friend. Do you know how many people in the world that's going to read that line and be like, oh, that's so obvious?
I don't mean to say like, as in like, oh, I know this piece of knowledge. I actually just think it's... And this is where I disagree with him generally, is that he's talking about the novel as a superior form, right? But these things are not obvious if the only thing you're consuming is novels. Once you get into the world of television, I think kids at a fundamental level understand this. Kids now understand meta so well. Oh, sorry. Keep bumping this thing. With the internet, kids understand now. Like, everyone understands meta in a very... And to them, this sort of thing, even though it's expressed well or whatever, is something that they inherently just understand now. So that's where I push back and I go, well, I'm not smart or anything. This is the standard now.
Wow.
Everyone is meta. Like, we don't live in a world where you can be singly immersed in, fiction and then go to your everyday real life. Like, there are so many windows and layers now. So I think what he's saying is true and is probably revelatory at the time, but now it's kind of... It's like, the cave allegory. like when Plato came up with it, it was like, whoa. And then since then, like every kid's seen The Matrix, so everyone understands what the allegory is now.
Wow, that's such a good point.
It's like the
Oh my God.
democratization of basic knowledge that kind of. Anyway.
No, I think what you said is super true. Just I guess the last quote to close up my XYZ section, which is, I think you would love this. I mean, like, he talks about dreams.
Oh, you know me so well.
Frick. Of course he would like this dream part. Like, So he says, how can uncontrolled imagination, dream, be integrated into the novel, which is by definition supposed to be a lucid examination of existence? And also, and he's a huge fan of Franz Kafka. Like this, half the book is about Kafka. He says Kafka's novels are the supremely lucid gaze set on the modern world, along with the most unfettered imagination. That's just beautiful.
Yeah.
I like it when he fanboys. Do you like it?
I think that's honestly the most enjoyable thing about the book is when he like alludes. He's like, oh my god, Savanta is like, oh my god. It gets a bit annoying when he fanboys over like, he's like, Europe's novel's the best. It's like, okay.
Well, we'll get into his extreme Eurocentrism later.
Oh man.
Yeah, but I just think this is a beautiful quote, and I think that's literally what I aim for as an aspiring novelist too, and what I look for in art really is for it to be lucid, clear, logical, but also unfettered imagination. Like that's what I want.
I don't know that I agree about being lucid. I think art only needs to be digestible.
That's what I mean. What? What's the difference?
Lucid, I think, aspires to some sort of truth. But to me, digestible is like tricking someone's brain into processing it.
That's what I mean. Yes, tricking someone's brain into processing it.
Yeah, but I don't know that that's what he meant. That's not what I felt like when I was reading what he was saying.
You know what's funny? He says that's what he aims for, but I feel like there are many, many people in the world who will read his novels and be like, this is the opposite of lucid. I don't know what the is going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's got an interesting... because I have no experience of his novels directly. But
okay, cool. That is it for my XYZ question. It was very quotable, and I listed 4 quotable things. Your turn. What was your XYZ again? Remind the chat.
I can go with something that is probably more on, like, in the idea of what you were talking about. I was gonna say, like, it's somewhere in between narrow and specific. And I'm trying to figure out, the reason I don't know which one to go with is I don't know whether it's good or bad. Do you know what I mean? Narrow has a negative connotation, specific has a positive connotation. And it really rides the line. So maybe narrow dash specific.
That's good. That's perfect. That's a great XYZ word. XYZ doesn't have to be a single word. It can be like an idea. That's great. This book is very narrow / specific. What's the top 3 most narrow and specific thing?
I think maybe this is me talking in generalities, but he makes a lot of, I think I alluded to it earlier, but he makes a lot of brand sweeping statements.
Yep.
And they start out incredibly smart, incredibly perceptive, very clear. But then he continues to talk about them. I think some of it, you can kind of tell that, you can very much tell it's conversation or it's like a speech, like a talk or something.
That is true. That's the last chapter, I think.
Yeah, or a lot of it is musings. And you can tell because it's very imperfect. And because by the nature of being a good writer, you're going to have like some really great perceptive lines quotable. But if you go on and you talk for longer and longer, you can undermine your own argument. You can introduce confusion. And that's kind of what starts to happen with a lot of these. So that's where I would talk about like overstepping. I think, I know people who, I'm one of these people as well. So I can kind of see it. I might say something really smart or really...
And then you overdo it.
Smart. But just I make a statement that is true, is relatively true. Like people are like, oh, that makes sense, and then I keep talking, and then people's eyes just start to glaze over, and they're like, oh, he's wrong.
I do it too. I think it's so easy to step into didacticism.
And the moment you do that, you lose the magic of the statement that you initially made. And so that's one of the things he does. I think the other thing about it that is maybe I think more like specific is, like you were saying before, just the love of all of these elements. He just loves things. Like he loves like music, and he loves like all of these things, and he loves them in a way that I can resonate with. Like,
aww.
And you can see he's like, I love this, and I've been thinking about it for so long, and I can tell, and I like woke up one day and I was like, oh, like I was in a way that's kind of like, why did you think about the thing that you like that much? Don't you just like it? It's like, yeah, but I realize now that it speaks to the soul of the universe or something. And people are like,
oh.
And so I really,
that's so good.
So I really like that part of it. I think that was really interesting.
I love that part too. I think to echo what we said earlier, he's the biggest fanboy of Cervantes, Kafka, music. He likens his novelistic techniques to composition, like musical composition, a lot, and I love that.
Yeah.
And he says up until the age of 25, he was much more drawn to music than to literature.
I love that that's my favorite thing about those like cross-disciplinary sort of people who, I mean, even like kind of pop examples of that would be like Damien Chazelle or something, like using his experience with like, you know, really loving jazz drumming, like making it into Whiplash, or like Damien Chazelle is the guy who did La La Land as well. There's a real musicality to his films.
Yeah.
Even when they're not explicitly about music, they often are. Interesting.
Yeah, let's go back to XYZ. You said that was your second thing, his connection, his fanboys over music. That's more specific than narrow. So what was the third thing?
This is just the general vibe of the book.
Mm-hmm.
It's very exacting. It's very didactic. And so maybe that one's a good one, you know, it kind of balances both. I don't really know how I feel about it, because there's lots of things I agree with, but there's also lots of things I disagree with.
Can you give an example? There are plenty of things I'm like, as well, but I think I could just kind of gloss over them. Especially all the references to like obscure.
It's so specific that a lot of entire parts are incredibly dull. Like really, like if I had a conversation with this guy and he was saying these things, I'd be like, you're a bore. You're an uninteresting, boring person. And some of it is like really fascinating because of the specificity. You know, when you like, the more specific you are, the more polarizing you end up.
Yeah.
And I think, he definitely rides that line, because like you were saying about part 6, which we can get into if we want to talk about it later. But man, part 6 is just the fact that he thought that could be
a good idea.
But I understand why he did it. So this is the thing as well, right? Like I understand why it is, and I understand the thematic reason for it, and I can see how it plays into the whole piece. It's like,
it's just boring to get through, hey?
But it just actually sucks by itself. Like it's just crap.
By the way, chapter 6 is also the part that I missed 10 pages of that I'll read after the recording. But now that we're talking about it, I might as well bring up the opening of chapter 6 is absolutely heartbreaking. I'm sure you agree. The italicized part about his translation.
Yeah, no, I read it. I'm trying to think how I feel about it. I mean, I don't think it's heartbreaking, to be honest with you. I've never had a language barrier, so I've not experienced that. So maybe
okay.
It definitely just doesn't resonate as much for me. Also, at this point in the book, I'd had enough of this guy, frankly. He deserved a little bit of suffering.
Anyway, he's basically just saying that after he was expelled from his country and moved to France, he lost his entire Czech audience. Practically speaking, I no longer have the Czech audience. Translations are everything. But then he's often dismayed at the way that his works are translated into other languages. Anytime he would be formally experimental, like the translators would diminish it and like polish it off into something more flat. And then I think he's understandably frustrated by that. I mean, I get that. And then he starts checking his own translations in the 3 or 4 foreign languages that I can read. And then he says, the writer who determines to supervise the translations of his book find himself chasing after hordes of words like a shepherd after a flock of wild sheep. A sorry figure to himself, a laughable one to others.
Oh, this book really shines for me when he starts talking about the specifics of the mechanics of writing a book and creating character and like that stuff. That sings a lot more to me. I'm like, oh, this is craft. This is someone who's carefully considered over like years of writing and like figuring out like what works, what isn't. I was like, oh, that's really good. But when he talks about these large kind of ideas and analysis, I kind of get less and less interested.
Yeah, this book is an emotional journey, isn't it? You're never quite sure how you feel. It's always fluctuating.
Yeah.
Cool. Now let's do the one last question to close off the spoiler-free section. Although there's no really spoiler-free here in this book. But basically, who would you recommend this book to?
One would be like people who are trying to I don't know, just find a new way to be inspired. Mind you, I'm not saying he's inspiring. I'm just saying the book may make you think about things that would inspire, that would lead you to kind of unroadblocking yourself. But there's also the case that you might be wanky yourself and then read it and be like, I'm not.
When two wanky meet, well, you're not the same kind of wanky. When like when you don't match his freak.
when I don't match wank.
when he outwanks you and you're like, oh, when you're wanky but unself-conscious, that might irritate you. Well, yeah, I think Milan Kundera is the patron saint of literary wankers, and especially in China.
Oh, so is he big in China?
Massive in China.
Is it because of the revolution? Like, but
I find it baffling. I don't understand why.
Because it's the government shouldn't like him, right? No,
of course not.
But why is he so popular? How does he get popular? Like, wouldn't they have just censored him?
No. The Chinese government doesn't censor 1984, doesn't censor Milan Kundera.
They're like, that's real confidence. They're like, you guys won't get it.
Exactly. Do you know why? Because the reading population is such a small percentage, and then the reading population who is able to use those works to think critically about their own government is tiny on top of that.
Yeah.
So...
Right.
It's actually perfectly safe to read Kundera in China, and he is massively popular. And when I was younger, it bothered me so much because it seemed like no one around me was being critical of the government, and yet they all love Kundera. I'm like, why do you love him? And to be honest, I still don't really get it, but I also know that there are critical voices in China who love Kundera and who admire him for his critical stance. So I don't know.
Interesting. That's actually really, really interesting.
Right.
Because how does that happen? Because obviously, like, the government has to be aware of it. They're just not concerned about it.
Yeah. Also, like totalitarian governments, it's easy to think of it as a monolith, but really it's comprised of people.
Yeah.
And in the government itself, of course, not everyone is interested in literature, or
it's just people aren't reading.
Yeah, exactly. And not even like Kundera is not even like, even in his early works when he's more political, he's not as obviously on the nose as Orwell is. And yet Orwell is like a bestseller. Orwell is on a required reading list for Chinese high schools. Do you know that?
That's crazy.
It's not that people read it and they don't get it. It's when they read it, they get it, and they do nothing about it. And they accept it.
But I can kind of understand accepting it because it's just too inconvenient to do otherwise. Like I fully understand.
You understand? I also understand. I think it's just sad.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, and that's how you know that that's because if you want to maintain totalitarianism, you just have to make it acceptable enough.
Yeah.
Like the
That's
people can't
true.
be, because if it's totalitarian and people are really poor and suffering, like
As people are in China, so that's why periodically things happen. But if
yeah,
you're comfortable,
exactly.
if you're comfortable enough to be educated and to read Orwell, it's gonna inconvenience you to do anything about it.
That's it. Yeah.
Fuck. So you know the difference between Ken Liu and Milan Kundera? Even if Kundera was alive, which he isn't, he died in 2023. I would not want to be his friend. I want to be Ken Liu's friend.
That's true. I think Ken Liu is probably a good person, and I think Milan Kundera is probably not. I don't know. I don't know for a fact, but my suspicion would be
That's hilarious.
not a great guy. Don't you would agree too, right? Like,
Yeah, I just said I want to be Ken Liu's
Yeah.
friend, not Kundera's friend.
and you know, if you reduce the scales of magnitude and you decrease them, both in terms of fame and in terms of difficulty of personality, that's probably what I would say about being my friend versus being Jeremy's friend. Like, you know what I mean? I think that's roughly equivalent.
So you're comparing yourself to Kundera.
Yeah, again, I'm reducing the scales of magnitude, but
Of wankiness. Oh my god.
yeah,
You know, I love it. I think you're a fantastic book reviewer.
make things as personal as possible.
Yeah. Who would I recommend this book to? If you love Europe.
If you're racist, woo,
If you love holidaying in Europe, I don't know what y'all do. If you love Europe, if you think Eurocentrism is the right way to go, you're gonna love this book.
if you love Europe,
You know, Derek literally texted me. He said, if I had to read the word Europe one more time, he doesn't write 3 sentences without mentioning the word Europe.
I was like, I hate Europe now. I didn't hate Europe before. I didn't have any view on Europe. And all of a sudden he's just like, Europe, 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 novel,
Oh,
novel,
man.
Europe, Europe, novel,
Like,
novel, Europe, Europe,
Eurocent-
Europe.
Maybe I would, like, based on what I know of his life, maybe it's the fact that he has lived like across different countries in Europe, and he would have sharply detected the difference between Eastern, Central, and Western Europe, that he is more compelled to think about Europe as a whole, like intra countries and also like as a continent. But yeah, like extreme Eurocentrism, everything human progress happens in Europe, and all of his inspirations come from Europe. Like everything, he knows the rest of the world exists, but it's like he thinks they exist in service of Europe.
Yeah, it's pretty gross.
It's
Like,
so
he's-
bad.
Go on.
Who else would I recommend it to? Yeah, if you're an aspiring novelist, basically like what Derek said, I think it'll help you. You don't have to agree with everything he says, but it certainly won't hurt your novel writing journey. If you love Kafka, I think you'll definitely appreciate his take on Kafka. I mean, I've only read The Metamorphosis, and reading his analysis of Kafka actually taught me so much.
And it makes you want to.
Yeah.
Are you going to read more now?
Yeah. I want to read The Trial. Oh my god, he spends so much time talking about the trial.
Maybe half the book is talking about the trial and Kay.
And Joseph K.
Joseph K. I was thinking about that more recently, and I was thinking about how Blade Runner 2049, the character's name is K. Yeah, I think not everyone. A lot of people have, because I think it's one of the movies that you study in year 12 for advanced English, and the character. So there's a replicant. So replicants are like androids or whatever, and they're trapped in this sort of inhuman system of being born into a world. The original one by Harrison Ford in it, very famous movie. Blade Runner 2049 was a sequel by Denis. I think it was directed by Denis Villeneuve.
Oh, okay.
In, was it 2019 or 18 or whatever? And in that one, the character's name is Kay, but at another point in it, he's given the name Joe, or he takes the name Joe. And I was like, I don't know that for a fact that Joseph K and Joe and K are like related, but it's pretty plausible because one of the lines that that is constantly repeated is there's a baseline test to check basically if the replicants are developing not free will, but sort of closer to humanity than intended. And that test is basically reciting the passages from Nabokov's Pale Fire. So it's pretty literary.
It's so literary.
It's very literary. It's pretty literary. So I was like, oh, maybe it is related.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense for a film to give homage to Franz Kafka. I mean, he's so larger than life. So that's who we will recommend it. Chat, let us know if at this point in our discussion you are inclined to read the book. Okay, now let's provide a roadmap of the book, and I think it's fairly easy because there's 7 discrete chapters and there's no spoiler involved. So
I guess the first bit is the depreciated legacy of Cervantes. Cervantes? The guy who wrote Don Quixote. That's all I know.
Yeah.
And basically this bit is where, as we've mentioned before, he goes on a long rant about what a novel is and how great Europe is. That's effectively this section, right? Summarized?
That's the book summarized.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, particularly using Cervantes as a description of like, this is what a novel truly is. This is where the novel starts.
Yeah, and one important concept he brings up is the death of the novel. And my favorite point in this first essay is how the totalitarian society kills the novel, because he makes the point that a novel is about complexity. And yet totalitarian universe is based on like aggressive reduction. And so like a novel is grounded in relativity and ambiguity of things human, so it's incompatible with the totalitarian universe.
Part 2 is called Dialogue on the Art of the Novel, which I think is where the name of the book comes from, right? And this to me was my favorite part of it. It was the most interesting part. Yeah, because it's where he really dives into what a novel is, what the model of the novel is, and he talks about characters, what they represent, and he has this great, and I don't know the quote, but maybe you remember it, where he starts talking about characters as like models. They're not simulations of real people. They are like imagined. What is it? Imagined.
I have that exact line underlined, Derek. Oh, a character is not a simulation of a living being. It is an imaginary being, an experimental self.
Yeah. And then I think he talks about characters having code or like codes. And it reminded me of the conception that he's got of character. I think it must be relatively universal because I was listening to a podcast. There's a lot of community, like the show, the sitcom community, like fan podcasts, and on one of them, like Dan Harmon went on one of them, the creator of Community, and he talks about how he creates characters, and he describes characters are parts of machines. They are not entire full machines themselves, but they exist based on, and there's a bit where he talks about his characters and he breaks them down to these word chains or word codes or whatever.
Isn't that exactly what Kundera does?
No, sorry, sorry, I'm talking about Kundera now.
Oh, okay, right, sorry.
Yeah. And in his novel, they each represent this string of things. Basically, I think his conception of character is really interesting, and it's quite inspiring as well.
Yeah, I think it comes up in this dialogue where another writer interviews Milan Kundera, and this is why it's a literal dialogue. And the other writer asks him, how come your characters have no background information? Like in your novel, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, we know so much about this one character's childhood, his mother and his mother's childhood, but for this other character, we know nothing. And then Kundera is like, because those things are not relevant to that character's theme. Those are not relevant to what I'm trying to create with that character. And that makes a lot of sense, and I love that.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. And I think it's...
Look, I can see why this book will irritate you now, because Milan Kundera, I mean, this is granted the era that he lived in. He would definitely dismiss television or any popular form as mass media, and he has this huge disdain for mass media. Which, I mean, I don't really blame him, but I also don't like that he doesn't give mass media the credit that it deserves. Like, just, yeah.
Anyway, not to drag on about TV for too long. I could talk about that forever.
All right, the third part is notes inspired by the Sleepwalkers. Is the Sleepwalkers the trilogy? Like the trilogy that he's analyzing in
it
part
is.
3?
But I don't know if that's him or it's someone else. We should probably look that up. This is very unprofessional.
I mean, I'm not European. I can't pronounce any of the names.
I'm not European.
He's talking about how, like, a trilogy of novels, each novel in that trilogy illustrates a possibility.
At the end of the day, it's basically like an English teacher breaking down like a book.
Yes.
Oh, and then chapter 4 or part 4 is dialogue on the art of composition. I think that's where he talks a lot about music.
If you're a classical composer, I think you might like this chapter.
I think it's got an interesting thing about composition. I'm sure though, if you were a composer and you read it, you would be like, that's obvious. All of this is obvious.
Okay, part 5 is Somewhere Behind. This is where he unleashes his Kafka fanboy self.
Oh man. And for that reason, I actually quite enjoyed this bit.
And this chapter is divided into 7 sections.
Yeah.
It's so wanky.
but it's quite enjoyable.
I love it.
Yeah. But he basically talks about administration and bureaucracy, and I have a intense fascination with bureaucracy generally.
Of course you do. Yeah, I see why you would like this chapter.
So I really enjoyed this chapter.
Yeah, that's awesome. The next bit is the dreaded part 6. 63 words. I mean, I think at least read the first page. If you're bored out of your mind, at least read the first page.
Which, it's very touching. It's hard to be understood, blah, blah. He suffered from political, whatever. But bro, I'm not reading 65, 63 words?
63 words from his own personal dictionary.
And they're not even what the words mean necessarily. And a lot of the times they aren't what the word means. And it's his very specific definition of what the words mean. And I find it annoying because I do this. I will use words in my way with my own dictionary up here. And people are like, what are you talking about? That's wrong. And I'm like, yeah, but it's right for me. And no one cares. Man. So he shouldn't be able to get away with this because I can't do it. But also, it's just, as I've grown older, I realize it's actually just super annoying. And it's just not interesting. But I'll give you an example of one that I thought was really great. Hat. Magical object. I remember a dream. A 10-year-old boy is standing at the edge of a pond wearing a big black hat on his head. He throws himself into the water. They pull him out drowned, and he still has the black hat on his head. Peak fiction.
I love it.
If that's what most of his writing is like, I would read it. I know that story, and that's that kind of story that Murakami loves. But that Europe thing, I just honestly, I was I was vomiting. I was just spewing.
Oh God, yeah. Okay. The last chapter is Jerusalem Address, the novel and Europe. I think in a way it's the most insufferable chapter. But also because it's acceptance for an award, right? So he has to spiel everything again in a few pages, and it's also the shortest chapter. So I get why formally it has to be that way.
Other than, an interesting political position, I think there are a couple of things that are I got some good takeaway lines from it, but most of it is very wanky, and it's very oh my God, me. Like Jerusalem, like Israel, I stand up against tyranny. I think a lot of it is basically that position, which has not aged very well.
No.
He has a great line about novelists who are more intelligent than their books should go into another line of work. I think that's kind of what we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks.
Exactly. Exactly. That's so true. He says the great novel should be smarter than the novelist, than the person who created them. And I think that's so true. I think The Catcher in the Rye is smarter than J.D. Salinger.
Hey, it should be. That's why it's great. And that kind of ties into how I view the book generally. I think we were talking earlier about the meta nature of the book. If the book is representative of what he thinks, it is a kind of a journey, this book. It has like sort of a novelistic quality to it. And in that novel, Milan Kundera himself feels to me like a character. And that character is one who is aggressively flawed and has a lot of contradicting ideas about things, and yet is empathetic. So is both, you could revile him, but also quite empathetic. And to me, that's how I feel about the book generally. And viewing it through that lens, I really enjoyed the book a lot. But if I take him seriously at his word, and I kind of sit with everything he says, and I believe everything he says, then I hate the book, if that makes sense.
That makes so much sense.
So
that makes so much sense.
Where I end talking about the book, generally speaking. I think it's a really interesting. If the life of a novelist isn't kind of, a story in itself, then this is a really interesting book. If it's not, and this is all didactic, it's boring as shit.
I think Kundera would have preferred, even wanted, your first interpretation. I think it's less obvious in this book, but it's more obvious in his novels that he wants to be taken that way. I really think so. I don't think he sets out. I think he despises instruction. I think he despises instruction. Whatever he says, he's putting his persona into it too. So
yeah,
I think your first way of interpreting is what he would have wanted, actually. And it's amazing that you articulated it clearly.
And even if he, the person, didn't want it, he, the novelist, did want it, if that makes sense.
He's spiraling.
I think, I think you can hold both those views at once. I don't know, what's your kind of takeaway of the book, like in the end of it all?
My takeaway is I learned a lot from this discussion with you.
Oh,
I really did. My other takeaway is that did you know he created this cover himself?
That's why it's so shit.
It's so good. So listeners, you will see the book cover on the thumbnail of the episode, so you know what we're talking about. It looks like a middle finger or a foot or a toe, and it's published by Faber and Faber. And I think all of the iconic Faber and Faber illustrations are created by Kundera himself. My other takeaway is I've learned so many wanky words from this book. Do you know this word, oniric?
Oh yeah, I saw that. I had
times.
No idea what that word was before I read it in this, and I was like, dude,
I googled
you don't
it.
need.
I googled it. Oniric, ONEIRIC. It just means dreaming. Like, just say dreaming. Like, what the f is wrong with you?
He just loves words, and I think I once used to love words like that. Part of it was because I thought it like made me smart, and I found out that it didn't, and now I don't care anymore.
But yeah, we're talking about my takeaways from this book. Yeah, I think my takeaways from it are much less critical than yours. I really enjoyed being miserable with him for a while, and I like that it's not too long and that it's short, and then it stopped when it needed to be stopped. It feels kind of nice and self-indulgent to be literarily miserable with someone.
Well, that's because I think you like have a much stronger connection to the novel form than I do. So you might understand his like criticisms a bit more, and you share a sort of like socio-political background.
Yeah.
That I don't.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh yes, we are going to do a quick run through of some Goodreads reviews that I found. Licensed Poetics reacts to unhinged Goodreads reviews.
I will read the first 1-star review because it's hilarious. 1 star. It takes truly remarkable skill to write a series of reflection on the novel and yet manage to avoid even a fleeting reference to any woman novelist. Impressive.
It's pretty bad. Like, it's seriously bad. It's almost like he's never read any women. But I think he's got limited respect for the woman artist.
Women artist, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really comes through.
That is unforgivable.
You know, Murakami is heavily inspired by many women writers.
Respect.
Just saying.
Murakami is the feminist.
That's so bad. That is so bad. I sound like the worst apologist ever. We should just cut all that out. Or you should really clown me for it. Get the views.
It's going to the clips.
Oh, God.
Okay. I think next one, you should read a 5-star review.
Oh, it's quite long, this one. Part of the way through any book, I usually get a good feeling about how many stars I'm going to give it. I finished this one and thought to myself, I've got no idea. Maybe it was a mistake to read this before reading any of Kundera's novels. The book was dense, but his ideas are intriguing, provocative really. And I don't use that word very often because most works that are provocative are aiming to be so, which feels very dishonest. But this book doesn't fit that, and it seems honest. I've decided to give it 5 stars. There are a number of ideas presented that I disagree with. I could even be persuaded that he's absolutely full of shit. It's possible to be honest and full of shit both. But the work was provocative, held my attention, and made me think. Having done that, I think it's worthy of 5 stars.
Applause.
I think this is probably how I view the book. I wouldn't give it 5 stars probably, but this is basically how I feel about the book. And I hope that the people in my life view me the same way that this person views this book.
Gosh darn, not everything's about you. Chad, leave in the comment and tell Derek not everything is about him. Yeah, but don't you just love the complexity? It's like, it's possible to be honest and full of shit. Like, okay, next 1-star review. The art of the novel is painfully pretentious and bland. I can't think of any reason a person would benefit from reading it.
But I agree with that too. I can see how. I like the one that goes, this was actually the book that got me to stop reading Milan Kundera. Ironic, as it's his book on how to write a book, which did it.
Wait, does that mean this person previously liked his other books?
Yeah, I think so.
Love it. This next one, 2 stars. Oh, 2 stars. Well, at least now I know I should never try to read The Unbearable Lightness of Being. Fair.
I had that thought partway through, actually.
Fair.
And the last one, quick one. Oh, well, not quick one, but 3 stars. Turns out Kundera writes nonfiction the same way he writes fiction. Aestheticized philosophical principles that he treats from a cool artistic distance. Developed, or in his terminology, meditated upon, in a way that leaves you unsure, but inspired. There are definitely some gems to be found and a whole lot of mental masturbation.
That is so true. That is so true.
Gives great insight, and I don't understand this bit. Gives great insight, however, into his writing process, which is more meditated upon than I had allowed myself to meditate upon. I don't know what that means.
I know what that means. It means this person recognized how meta the book is and how meta thinking about the book is. And then they were discouraged, whereas you just powered through and soldiered on. Like, this person was...
That gave me the strength to power on.
No, not reading the book as in, like, in your thinking. This person was intimidated by the level of spiraling and meta-ness needed to think about the book. Yeah, I really enjoyed this episode.
Yeah, it was a good one.
This is a good place to wrap up today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. And if you'd like to support Licensed Poetics, please head to buymeacoffee.com/licensedpoetics. Thanks again for listening to this episode of Licensed Poetics. I'm your host, Fang Ling.
And I'm Derek Dow. And we will see you next time when we don't have a book yet, but we'll let you know when we have a book and then you can read along and we can all talk about it together.
Yes, please follow us on Instagram if you'd like to know which book we're picking next. Okay, see you. Bye.
Bye.